So just one last thing. I thought it was kind of strange, Mr. Snyder, that you'd be interested in teaching this new design thing, but a couple of weeks ago I read about John Gall and his systemantics theory and how software and systems all work together, and now it makes total sense. So I think it's really cool that you're pursuing this. And
well, I'm putting forth Mr. George would be teaching this class. I
but
would not be teaching.
but I'm starting to see how all this stuff fits together in the big picture.
Computer science
Yeah.
that Ms. Jinks was talking about earlier to the computer science I teach, it all ties together.
Yeah, so you guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I would seek a motion to approve the courses just presented to us.
Madam Chair, I move that the Falls Church City School Board approve the following 2020-21 new course offerings from Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School, App Creator and Sustainable Design and Engineering, and for George Mason High School, Probability and Statistics, Ceramics, Human Anatomy and Physiology, an Introduction to Math Science, IB Design, HL1 and HL2, Technical Theater as presented.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstained? Mr. Brett, we just learned that streaming is not working. Okay. We're wondering if we should do we know if we're going to get it back online? Oh, we're not going to get it back online? Okay. We were just wondering if we should move around the calendar discussion if it was coming back online, but if it's not, then we will continue on. Okay. Great. Well, next up then is 8.02, our calendar survey results.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And while it's not streaming, it will be recorded and will be available to the public shortly, probably tomorrow. So anybody who wants to watch can certainly watch. Well, good evening. It is my pleasure and opportunity this evening to share with you information regarding the school calendar survey results for the 2020-2021 school year. Tonight, in my role as superintendent, I'll be representing the work of the ad hoc committee, and as my role in the superintendent, supporting their work because they have put forward quite an effort, and I want to thank them, and I will in just a second, for their incredible work. Additionally, in my role at the end of the presentation, I will be making a recommendation to the board based on the work of the ad hoc committee, feedback from the survey, community inputs, and the like. But as we go through the presentation tonight, I do wish for you to consider a couple of things. One is, if you have questions, please note those so that we can begin to answer those at the end. And we'll have as much of the answers as we have tonight. Anything that we don't have, we certainly can get to you relatively quickly because the turnaround on the vote for the calendar is next Tuesday. But a couple other considerations just to kind of plant in your mind as you're observing this information. The first is the notion of equity and what does equity mean. And for us, equity means giving students what they need in the moment that they need it to ensure that all students are successful. Thinking about structure, what is the structure that we're looking for that would support student learning as best we possibly can. And last is good governance, something that you all have talked a lot about as in your role as school board members, thinking about governance. So I think those are three things just to kind of, for context, to consider. Again, equity, the second is structure, and the last is governance, regardless of where you are on the calendar as you've seen it so far. So the outline for this evening, some of this will be going over some ground that has been shared a number of times, but as good communicators and stewards of the public's trust, we feel like we need to continually go over some things that we've talked about previously just to make sure that it's on everybody's radar. So we do want to review tonight the calendar development process to make sure everybody's aware, share the results of the calendar survey, provide information about the data from the survey as it's presented, answer any additional questions that you may have regarding the school calendar, and then as we move towards the December 17th ratification date, think about what kind of documents do we need to make sure that we prepare so that you're ready to make your decision next Tuesday. So I want to begin with the ad hoc committee membership. And here you will see a very broad range of people. There are many parents on this list. There are staff on this list. There are school-based leaders. There are central office staff. There are support folks. And our own Niharika Singh V is also was on the ad hoc committee, so we had the student voice as well. And I'd like to extend just a very personal and warm thanks to everybody who spent time working on this ad hoc calendar. I also want to take a minute to thank Marty Goodell for her work, Perla Enadano and John Brett for being behind the scenes, really getting some information out, helping us get organized and sorted in our work. Their commitment and dedicated hours have really helped us get to where we are in a rather efficient and I think effective way. And at the same time, you would never know how hard they worked to get us there. So I also want to extend a special thank you to the leadership, William Bates and Kristen Michael, who both co-chaired that ad hoc committee as they were moving forward. So anyway, I just want to start there. The next is just to do a quick glimpse into the work. Here you'll see the dates that the ad hoc committee met and the topics of conversation. Their first meeting was October 16th. The calendar basics and drivers were reviewed. They reviewed the ad hoc committee's charge, which I'll talk about in just a second. The second was to develop the 4 calendar options, 2 pre-Labor Day, 2 post-Labor Day. Committee members then brought drafts back to their schools after that to receive organizational feedback throughout the system, throughout the community. And then at that third meeting, they came back to discuss the inputs that they received, made adjustments to the calendar based on those inputs, finalized the 4 draft options, and shared those drafts with myself to develop the survey. And those calendar options were presented in a regular school board meeting to you all on the 12th. In my humble opinion, this has been what I would consider an open and transparent and predictable process that we've gone to pretty extraordinary lengths, I think, to communicate about from the very beginning. The first conversation we had about the calendar actually goes back to August and September, where we were asked to put it on the agenda for consideration, and we did that. And further developing and following through with this process that was shared so publicly, I believe, serves to continue building credibility and trust in our division. And so being able to present what we're going to do what we said we're going to do, and follow through with what we said we're going to do, I think over time will continue to build the confidence and the trust in the community. The committee that you see, we have a couple of pictures here, spent some dedicated hours to the work. There were 4 separate committees that grew out of the ad hoc committee that developed the 4 separate calendars. And their charge, and I want to be really clear what their charge was to develop 4 calendars for consideration using the inputs that were shared, with 2 of the calendars being pre-Labor Day and 2 calendars being post-Labor Day. That was the extent of their charge. But utilizing the input that they received with respect to drivers then began to influence how those calendars began to take shape. So here you see another couple of pictures, the team in action. And I want to reiterate that between the second and third ad hoc committee meeting, they did develop first drafts. So that entire ad hoc committee meeting, which is about 35 people, did leave that ad hoc committee meeting, go back to their constituents, get feedback from the representative organizations that they were representing, so shared that with them, and then came back, and this is the last meeting where they were refining their final decisions with respect to the calendar. So what goes into the calendar? Again, we've been through this a couple of times. But I do think it's important to sort of reiterate again. The first is that we start with 180 days of instructions. The state of Virginia indicates that we need to have 180 days. Our teacher contract is a 200-day based contract that includes instructional days. It also includes professional development days, teacher work days, and some flex days. We work very hard, or as best we can, to balance quarters and semesters where possible. Because we go 180 days, it's 90 days a semester, 45 days a quarter. So as best we can, we do try to balance those to find logical breaks where they make sense. As we presented to the broader community and to the school board at a previous meeting, we shared where all the testing windows were. And as you look at the testing windows across the Commonwealth of Virginia, the United States, and internationally, you have a month and there is an exam. It just depends on which one it is. But there are three in particular that we pay very close attention to in the City of Falls Church. The first is we look very closely, first and foremost, at our standards of learning assessments that happen. Then we look at our AP assessments, which also happen in the spring. And then lastly, we look at our International Baccalaureate assessments, which are the international assessments that also happen in the spring. We do look at the holidays and where they break and identify if there are logical breaks around holidays to support families. We look at the athletic calendar simply because students who are participating in athletics are also required to follow our rights and responsibilities documents that are part of the school division. So it perhaps makes some sense to align school years to athletic calendars like other school divisions do. We did look at the state requirement, and that's sort of what led us here tonight, was that the state of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia, did change the code last year that allows school divisions to start earlier than previously were allowed to. And that was because more than 50% of the schools in the Commonwealth of Virginia start before Labor Day. And then we look at school board guidance, where we were looking to, as best we could, end the school year by June 15th, which has been the guidance for the last two calendars that I've been here for, and previous to that. And then we look at where it makes sense to add professional development days and professional days. In this list, I just want to be super clear that these are factors that had influence. These were guidelines. The school board guidance of the June 15th date was simply that, guidance. Like the other factors. The committee understood, as evidenced in two of the calendars that were presented as final options, that this guidance was not feasible in all cases. So that June 15th date actually was passed in two of the four schedules. That same flexibility around guidance holds with other drivers into the calendar. For example, balancing quarters. Each of the calendars have slightly different balanced quarters, depending on where breaks fall and the like. So although the committee tried, it was very difficult to incorporate every single driver into every single calendar. So they did the very best they could. There were two unique drivers that I had mentioned previously at a couple of meetings that are specific to this coming year. The first is we have a very late Labor Day in 2020. Labor Day starts on Labor Day is September 7th, which means that the start of school would be on September 8th. And we also have the George Mason High School move. And as I've indicated before, George Mason High School and Mary Ellen Henderson will have 2 additional days, one before winter break and one after winter break, to pack and to make the move into the new building. Again, just for purposes of redundancy perhaps, the reason that they're both Mary Ellen Henderson and George Mason High School is almost 70% of our middle school students take a high school course. Many of them move over to the high school for the high school course. Many of the students take a high school course at Henderson, but if the high school is closed and Henderson is open, we have students that don't have a place to go. So it made sense for us to close that secondary campus for those 2 move days. So these considerations actually were done prior to the drivers that were just shared by the committee. And it was interesting to see where the committee, the ad hoc committee, fell with their drivers in the context of, or where the ad hoc committee fell with respect to their desires as compared to the drivers that we shared with them. So these were considerations that were very near and dear, I think, to the ad hoc committee that drove a lot of the decision-making by that ad hoc committee. These are not in any particular order. They're not rank ordered. They're not in descending order. They just are. And the first was the 3-day Thanksgiving holiday was really important to the ad hoc committee. The second was that there be a 2-week winter break. The third was that there was an end by June 15th so that the school year didn't drag into the summer too far. The fourth was looking at time off for students and for teachers each month. So at least there would be 1 day each month for teacher planning and for students to get a break. Looking at how flex days are used by our staff throughout the year. Looking at start of school alignment with Virginia High School League sports. The 7th is looking at planning days after each quarter. Those are very important, particularly well, I won't say particularly to our secondary schools, but to all schools, elementary for those teacher work days in the fall, for teacher conferences, but more specifically into the secondary as the year progresses with grading and reporting. And then the last